Our next presenter for the afternoon is Pastor Joel Brandvold. Pastor Joel graduated from Bottineau High School in 1979 and Concordia College of St. Paul, Minnesota in 1984. He attended seminary at Fort Wayne, Indiana, with a vicarage assignment in Steelville, Illinois, and graduated in 1988. His first call was to Tolly, Flaxton, Larson, North Dakota, and in the fall of 1991, he took a call to Austin, Minnesota. In 1993, he was asked to assist the congregations in Kramer and Gardena and started Shepherd's Hill Retreat in 1994. In 1995, he was extended a call to serve Kramer-Gardena Parish along with his work at the camp. In 2005, he moved the camp to St. John, North Dakota and became the full-time director. In 2015, he began teaching and driving bus for the Bottineau Public School and serving Trinity Lutheran Church in Tolly on a part-time basis. He retired from teaching and driving bus in 2023 and still serves the Tolly congregation. Please help me welcome Pastor Joel Brandvold.
Thank you. As I look around the room, there's a lot of good friends, good neighbors, and people that I've sat with through many a grieving process. So appreciate all of you being here, appreciate the opportunity to be here. Nicole, I appreciate the work that you do and all that you have offered to this community. That's awesome. And Christy, thank you for coming and sharing about hospice in the area. I'm really glad to see it's back. My wife was working with hospice and home health when we first got married back in the early mid-90s, and she worked with them until they decided that they could no longer afford to do hospice in this area. So it's really good to have it back in the area again. So I thank you to all those who have volunteered to be part of that today as well. It's a truly needed and important ministry in our community. A couple of blank spots in the biography, and that was purposeful. In 1988, when I graduated from the seminary, we got our calls in April. In May was graduation. In June, I got married to my first wife, and in July, I was installed as pastor of 3 congregations, Tolly, Flaxton, and Larson, up in North Dakota. So we both made a move, we both combined lives, and had all of those stressors all at once in our beginnings together. It was a great experience to be part of the Tolly, Flaxton, Larson parish. While I was there, I also ended up serving a vacancy in Oxbow and Frobisher up in Canada, and was able to get to know a lot of the folks in that area as well. When we started doing things at camp, we wanted to do some leadership stuff for our students and our staff, and so we got involved with Tent Makers. It's a leadership training organization, and as part of that training that we go through with those students, we have life stories that they all get to tell. So they all get 7 minutes to tell their life story. Now I'm going to take a little longer than that, but the complaint always was we as leaders had a lot longer life to condense into 7 minutes because we had to do the example for them. Thankfully I don't have just 7 minutes today because it would be tough to put all of this into a short period of time. Beginning with that 1988 period of time, my wife and I were very excited about the opportunity to raise a family and to bring children into this world. It just didn't seem to work. We ended up going through the adoption process, preparing for that, and in 1991, as we were getting close to the finalization of that process, we ended up moving to Austin, Minnesota. They could transfer that process with us, and so we had them move all our paperwork down to Broward County in Minnesota so that we could continue with that process. That year at Christmas, as we came home, Bob and Karen had their son Jesse, and Carrie spent a lot of time holding him in her arms. He had recently been born, and she just felt so attached to him. And as we're going home, we had this conversation of, well, that was kind of interesting that, you know, you got to spend all that time with Jessie, and she was a little kind of pensive, and she said, yeah, I don't know, it's just kind of weird. I just had this feeling that I really needed to have this attachment with a baby. And after we got home, she complained that her back was hurting, and so was going to go to the chiropractor, first time that she had been to one in Minnesota. So they were going to do an x-ray just to make sure that there was nothing going on. Before they did that, they said, we need to do a pregnancy test, because if we do an x-ray and you're pregnant, we don't want to cause harm to the baby. They did a pregnancy test, and she walked out of the office to inform me that she was expecting. So in January, we began that joyous anticipation of baby coming. In May, she began spotting and went to the doctor, and they put her on bed rest. She had been teaching in the classroom, so there was a lot of concern about her being up on her feet all day long and that sort of thing. And so the doctor said, it's best for you just to be in bed. I don't want to put you in the hospital if I don't have to, but if it comes to that, we will. And so the day that she was supposed to be off bed rest, June 13th, excuse me, we decided that we were going to go look for a couch for the living room, which we had been putting off since we moved there. When people came to visit, we had 2 chairs, and we decided it was time to get some more seating. And as we got to the front door, all of a sudden she said, we're not going shopping today. Oh, really? Yeah, my water just broke. Change of plans. So we head to the hospital with all kinds of joy and anticipation. We got there about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the doctors examined her. They said, yeah, you are definitely in the process of labor, but you've not dilated a lot. So we're going to give you some Pitocin and see if we can't get this process to work a little faster. And so they did so, and she began to have some really, really hard labor pains, and yet there was still no change in the dilation. And they had a monitor in the baby's head that they had put in, and they said, the baby is becoming distressed. We really need to do something different. Well, this is 6 o'clock in the morning. And so we had gone for 12 hours with not a lot of change, and so then we agreed, yes, that would be a good idea. However, she did not want to be put under. She wanted to make sure that she could hold that baby the minute it was born. And so she said, I want a spinal. And they agreed to that. So they take her down to the neonatal operating room, which is just down the hall from where the delivery room was. And about half hour later, the nurse comes and she says, they're having difficulty getting the spinal to work, so we're going to have to put her under. If you want to come and tell her goodnight and that you'll see her when she gets back out, that would be fine. But you need to do so now because they're just getting ready to do that procedure. So I went down and told her I loved her, gave her a kiss. She really didn't say too much to me, and she kind of had a little bit of a concerned look in her eyes, but I didn't think much of it. When I got to the end of the hall, I was into the room. I got her over the PA, code blue, neonatal operating room. Doesn't matter when, still hits you hard. I knew it was her, or the baby, or both. And immediately one of the administrators of the hospital came to the room and said, "You stay here. We need to know where you're at so we can get information as we need it." About another half an hour later, they came and got me and said, "The baby is born. The first APGAR score was 2. It should be 6 or higher. We'll be doing another one shortly, but you can come down to the nursery and check things out." When I got down to the nursery, Philip was there. His second APGAR was 7. And they said, "We will keep him for a couple of days till we know how long he was without oxygen. We know that your wife was without for at least 15 minutes. Now we need you to go to her room and to see if you can help us wake her up." So I went to the room and tried to shake her a little bit, talk to her, called her name several times, no response. As things progressed, they said we need to send her to Rochester, so they decided to send her by ambulance to Rochester, which was just 45 minutes away. So in a good place in Minnesota at the time. But Philip was still going to be in Austin. This was 8 o'clock in the morning, Sunday morning. I had already arranged for somebody to do services for me, so I knew that that was not going to be an issue. Our school principal and her husband came right away when they heard and said, "We'll drive you to Rochester." I said, "Well, I really don't want to be without a vehicle there. You know, I don't want you to have to stay for however long." "Okay, then here's the deal. You ride with my husband, I'll drive your car so that you've got it there. And then we'll get you there so that you can meet up with her at the Rochester hospital." When we got to Rochester, I began making phone calls, shared with my parents. Her parents were in the process of heading up into Canada to go fishing. It's their normal fishing weekend, and let them know what was going on. As I'm waiting in Rochester, the doctors come and say, "We don't know how long for sure she's been without oxygen. We are seeing very little brain activity. We will keep her going on the ventilator as long as we can, but you need to know that there may be some tough decisions to make." And I looked at the doctor and I said, "We've talked about this. I know what she wants." And he looked at me and he said, "Who your age talks about this stuff?" "I don't know, but we did." And I can still remember the conversation that we had. I was on my way to a class up in Edmonton, Alberta, at the seminary up there. And we had this discussion on the way. So if something happened to one of us, where would we want to be buried? And if something happened to one of us and we were to end up on life supports, how would we want that handled? Just kind of conversation to pass the time. It was a long trip. And she had said that if there was hope to continue on, she would definitely want to stay on life supports. But if there was no hope, she said, "Don't keep me here artificially. I want to go home." And that's been my philosophy with my parishioners over the years as well. We can do a lot in the medical field. We can keep people going medically for a long time. But we can also try to play God in the wrong direction. And when it's time to go, we need to let God be God. And so that was what steered our decision in that process. It was a couple of days before her parents got down there, and we told the doctors we would need to wait until they got there to know exactly what their wishes were and make sure that they were okay with taking her off the ventilator. In the meantime, I told the doctors that I wanted to have my son placed in her arms before she died. So I called the Austin hospital and asked if I could come and get Philip and bring her to Rochester. He said, I really don't want that to happen. He said, we don't know how compromised he might have been. We don't know if there's a chance of seizures. We don't know a lot of things right now. We're gonna take him over there. The hospital over there needs to agree that they will keep an eye on him. So I talked with the ER. They said, sure, bring him down here, we'll watch him. We've got plenty of nurses on staff and things aren't busy right now. We can handle that. So I went and got him, brought him over, took him and laid him in her arms. We both gave her a kiss, told her we loved her, and I took him down to the ER. He was 12 pounds, 4 ounces when he was born. We're not so sure that when she was spotting that maybe she shouldn't have been going into labor, but we don't know that for sure. We're not sure what happened with her in that process of putting her under. We just know the result. And so after I had the opportunity to share with some of the family as they came what was going on, we took Philip and, well, we were gonna get Philip to take him back over to Austin. And when we got down to ER, I said, I'm here to pick up my son. And they said, who's your son? And so I told them, and they said, well, we don't have any record of anybody of that name being in here. They said, well, he wasn't here as a patient. He was here because, and then I shared the situation with them. And the nurse that was there said, well, I'm the one that took him, but I handed him off to so-and-so. And she said, well, I handed him off to so-and-so. And my son had been in the arms of 5 other nurses in different parts of the ER. And then they found out that he had just been born that morning. And you could have seen white sheets over their faces. We were passing around a newborn. But in all honesty, he looked like he was a year old. He held his head up, he sat up straight. He didn't look or act like a newborn. So we took him back to Austin, and 2 of the teachers that were co-teachers with my wife volunteered to nurture him, rock him, make sure he had plenty of physical attention, and they were his surrogates while we decided what to do with Carrie. It was a tumultuous time, and there was opportunity for me to tell God I was done. Anger, a real part of the grieving process. And I knew God could handle it. And he was okay with me being mad. But I also knew that he was there to carry me through. And that he had not turned his back on me, but he was carrying me, holding me safe, reassuring me of his grace. Lutheran school theme for that year was touching lives forever. In that whole process, even in her comatose state, Carrie was touching lives. The doctors and nurses that we had conversations with about our faith had very little connection to a church, and gave us opportunity to share with them what Jesus had done for us and was still doing for us, even in the midst of a horrible situation. In fact, that's on her tombstone. Touched by Christ, touching lives forever. That's a reality that we as Christians can celebrate. And that's the joy in the midst of suffering that we can be part of. It is not an easy thing to go through the loss of someone you love. And though we had only been married a few years, we had been good friends. In fact, that was the joke. Our friends all knew that we should be getting married, but we were always just good friends for 7 years before that. That event changed my thought process on a lot of things. Suddenly, there was less need to be right and more need to be compassionate. Suddenly, there was less desire to seek the things of this world and more desire to make sure that others knew what I and my wife knew about Jesus. That's why we took the proceeds from her life insurance and started the camp. And as we began that process, God led me to another point in life where he could bring another love into my life. And at the age of 2 years old, my son made his first proposal. He looked at Susie and he said, "Would you be my mommy?" And she said yes. And even though it's been almost 32 years since that time, 34 years since Carrie's death, those emotions are still raw. And the reality of love lost is still there. It is a different kind of love that I have for my second wife. It is still genuine, still sincere, still complete, but different. And that's the thing that we need to remember in this grief and loss process, is that God gives us the ability to start again. That's part of his grace. We talk about it all the time. We say that we practice it in forgiveness, in confession, and yet in reality, we only put it in practice when we see this grieving process work. And God gives us a new start. Life is never the same, just different. And that's a blessing. For us to say that this should have never happened, I don't know that we could ever identify that. I had elders in my congregation who encouraged me to go after the hospital and the doctor and sue them. For what? It wouldn't change what happened. And I honestly don't believe that they did anything that was wrong. They may have been unable to catch some things that may or may not have been able to be changed. But they did what they did with the intent of making life work for everyone involved. Dr. Nace became a good friend. He supported my son through college. He provided, a year after he was born, a scholarship fund in Philip's name to make sure that he could get a decent education. He didn't have to do that. We have a picture that hangs in the room in our house of an elephant with a flower in its trunk. A little backstory, Carrie always joked that she wanted a baby elephant in her backyard. And that precipitated a whole rash of gifts from others of elephants of all kinds. And when she died, her mother came to me and said, "You need to pick one of those elephants and give to her nephew, because he really wants one of her elephants." And I invited him in and I showed him the shelves, literally shelves, floor to ceiling of elephants. He said, "Pick whichever one you want. Take two if you want." And he picked this little one that when you squeeze it, you know how the strings are in the legs and it kind of buckles. That was his favorite. And that was the one that he and Carrie always played with when he would come to visit. So it has special memory for him. In the midst of all of this, you need to know one other thing. That when I married Carrie, her mother was very angry with God over the early death of her father. She had not gone to church for a long time, and she made no bones about the fact that she blamed God for taking Harry too soon. And then Carrie dies. Thanks to my wife, the relationship with that family continued on. She worked really hard to make sure that Philip knew his grandparents on his mother's side. And then Carrie's sister, her only sister, contracted AIDS from her husband, her second husband. whom she did not know had been in a bisexual relationship prior to getting married. And he was the carrier. She ends up dying. Doesn't help mom's anger at God at all. So then her husband retires from UPS. And 2 years after his retirement is diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And 6 months later, he's gone. You start to ask, how much more can one family deal with? A few months ago, I had the opportunity to preside over the funeral of Carrie's mom, Lou. But before that, I got some anticipatory grief. I had the opportunity to talk with her, and her comment was, I don't know why I have to be so angry at God. It's not his fault. I wish I could just get over my anger. But God's big enough to handle that. And he knows how to deal with it better than any of us ever could. And yet he gave her grace to come to that point in life where she could say, I'm done being angry. I'm willing to give in to him and let him be God. There are many facets to the story of a few years with one individual. And I could probably go on till midnight as well, talking about all the things that took place and the connections that were part of that. But one of the joyous results of that was when we had a group of kids from the Standing Rock Reservation in South Dakota come up to camp. I got this random phone call from a guy, and he said, you don't know me, but I found your website. And I got this group of kids. We're the poorest reservation in the nation, most poverty-stricken. I need to bring these kids to a place that's away from here. They have seen death and destruction way too much. They have witnessed suicides on a regular basis. They have seen beatings of their parents and grandparents way more than any child ever should. We need a safe place. What will it take? And I'm going through the calculations and I'm thinking, poverty-stricken group of people, there's no way they can afford this. I said, I tell you what, have you got transportation? Yeah, we can get them there. They said, we'll cover the cost if you get them here. Not sure how, but we'll figure it out. So that group of kids came up and they had asked me to do the worship and Bible study for them. And during that worship, I shared my story. And you could have heard a pin drop. I said, I had two choices. I could be angry at God and never go back to church again, or I could let God embrace me, hold on to His grace, and trust in His promises. And know that His forgiveness is mine, and that someday I will get to see my wife again. That group of kids, when they got on the bus to leave, began singing at the top of their lungs, "Our God is an awesome God." That would never have happened without my first wife dying. That would never have happened without the funds from her life insurance policy. That would never have happened without the support from family and friends to make that moment a reality. Don't ever forget those who are around you. They're not there to cause harm. They're there to help. And yeah, sometimes we need to provide a lot of grace because they say stupid things at stupid times and make things challenging. But they don't know the backstory. God does. As you look around the room, you will see several pictures on the walls. What you see within the frames of those pictures is just what is in the frame. But God knows what is outside of that frame. He knows that about our futures as well. And though our loss may seem unbearable, and though it may be challenging for us to deal with the loss of those people that we have loved, we know that God has a bigger picture in mind, and that He can provide all that is necessary. Philippians 4:19 has become my verse. It's been there since seminary. And my God will provide for all your needs according to His riches in Christ Jesus. Not all our wants, but all our needs. And our spirits may seem poverty-stricken. Our souls may feel empty. Our lives may be lonely. But God can fill those voids. And He can provide for all of those things that are necessary when the time is right. In the meantime, He lets us walk in the wilderness. He lets us journey through the valley of the shadow of death. And yet promises that we need not fear evil, for He is with us, and He will not forsake us. I'd like to open it for questions, comments, thoughts. Anything is fair game. I've been pretty much asked anything throughout life.
Does Philip have questions? Did he have questions growing up?
He had some questions growing up. Interesting thing, when his grandmother was near death, he went and took his adopted son Cohen to see her and introduce her to him. And she called me and said, you need to sit down with Philip and share the story because he has lots of questions. And so I called Philip and I said, what kind of questions can I answer? He said, well, I was just curious about different things just because I knew the story, but I didn't know Grandma's version. And I was just trying to make conversation. It's not like I don't know what went on. So he had lots of questions. There was a moment of great fear when one of the years we were at the fairgrounds. I'm somewhat asthmatic, and the air was heavy, and I began having difficulty breathing, so I took off for the ER and sent him to find Mom someplace else in the fairgrounds. We didn't have cell phones at the time. And his only thought at that point is, I'm going to be an orphan. And that was his great fear, that he would lose both parents. Going through the adoption process, he called and asked, so, medical records for Mom, where would we find those? And so I told him how he could get a hold of them. He said, well, it seems that when you become a parent, nobody really has any concern with whether you're going to live or die beyond that point. But when you're adopting, somehow you're supposed to live forever. And so we have to go through this process of proving that we're healthy enough to have a child and that we're going to live long enough to raise it. You have to understand, my son is very intelligent. He has lost no memory in his process of having low oxygen when he was born. And he is also very pointed in his assessment of things going on in the world. Other questions? By the way, interesting that you asked that question because one of my good friends from college had emailed me after Carrie died and said, please don't forget to talk about her, and especially to your son. She had lost her mother, and there were 7 kids in her family, and her dad would not allow her name to be spoken again from that point on. And she said that was very challenging. Another thing that often happens when you lose a loved one is people have expectations of how their memory should be held. My aunt, love her dearly, but she came to my mom's house and was having a holy fit because my and Carrie's picture was still hanging on the wall with the family pictures. How insulting to Susie. And Susie's like, that's not an insult, that's part of life. That's part of who you are, that's part of your history. Nobody can take that away. And to try and hide that or reverse that, that's just not a possibility. It is what it is. Acknowledge it, deal with the emotions that go along with it, and celebrate what you had and what you have. Nicole brought up an interesting thing about taking things to people's houses. One of the things that I realized when Carrie died is a real blessing was when people brought toilet paper, paper plates, plastic silverware, stuff where we didn't have to wash dishes. And who thinks about toilet paper when the family's all coming and you're grieving? But it's definitely a necessary part of life. So that's something that we often take to households, or those paper products that can make it so they don't have to run out and find something And also when you take a dish, whatever size it is, don't do a throwaway. Do something in a container that means something to you, because that makes commitment on your part to go back later to retrieve it. That forces a situation where you gotta visit them after the funeral's over. And that's the best thing for both you and them. To have that opportunity to sit down and talk about things as they are now. One of the other blessings that I found in that process was the fact that we didn't have to buy ham for about 6 months. We could have ham every week. That seemed to be the go-to food, which is great when you're doing sandwiches and those kinds of things. But it does get to be a little much sometimes, so maybe check to see how the freezer space is before you bring your food items.
Gift cards to restaurants really are nice.
Gift cards to restaurants, yeah. And that does a twofold thing. It makes it so they don't have to cook, and it also provides them an outing. And putting them back into the mix of society is important. There were many a night that I got in the car after Philip went to bed and made a trek around the streets of Austin and then came back home. I had a couple that stayed with him in the evenings, but it was just a way to get out of the house, get away from all the norms of life, and just have some time to think. When I was at Austin, we had a church of 750 members and a parochial school through the 6th grade. And I was in charge. And so I told my elders, I said, my world's upside down. I have always told my parishioners, don't do anything with big decisions until after a year. So I'm going to follow my own advice, but I do need some time. So I asked for a 6-month leave of absence. I loaded up Philip in my vehicle, and we were in 11 states in 9 months. Visiting relatives, visiting friends. Went to California to his godmother's so that she could spend a few days with him. Just had a whole variety of things that we were able to be involved in, and gave me an opportunity to process with a lot of different people and then care for my son in the process. That was a big question. How do I take care of a newborn and be a full-time pastor and caregiver for a congregation? And so after that year then, I provided a letter of resignation to the congregation and said, I really need to let you guys get in the process of replacing me and having somebody here who can really do the job as it needs to be, rather than me just limping you through in this process. It's not fair to me, it's not fair to my son, and it's not fair to you as a congregation. So that's when I moved back up to North Dakota, and shortly after that, Kramer and Gardena were looking for someone to help with their pastor who was ill. And so filled in there, and then he moved on, and they extended me the call to be their pastor along with what we were doing at the camp. Teaming up with other people is a tremendous help in the grief process. Letting other people help you is an important part of that. So be open to letting others do what they want to do to help you. And then be that resource. You might not have all the answers, but you probably know somebody who has an answer that can help them out. So be that for them. Any other questions? Well, we've had quite a day. A lot of good things that we've been able to talk about. We've laughed a little, we've cried a little. We've continued to grieve for those that we have loved, and we will continue to do that. Grief is something that never ends. It just takes on a different form at different stages of life. And so when we think about that process, it reminds me of 1 Corinthians 15. In a moment, in the blink of an eye, at the last trumpet, the trumpet shall sound, the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. That is the glorious blessing that we can all rest assured of. This isn't the end. It's part of the journey. And as part of that journey, we enjoy the trip. And we get to make some stops along the way that we wanted to make. And maybe we end up with some stops that we didn't intend to make. But through it all, God is there. He is with us. He is taking care of us. And He will help us through our grief process, no matter what comes. I pray the Lord's blessing on your process. If there are things that you have concerns about, that you need to talk about, you have been introduced to some resources here. I stand ready to help. My fellow pastors stand ready to help. Don't be afraid to ask. And let the Lord